to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. This one is going to be profoundly different, and I mean profoundly different in a million and one ways, because this is the first time we've ever tried to do the number of people we've got involved, but also it will be different because I'll be sort of the recipient of questions and things as well. Now today, as well as the wonderful Sarah in the background, it sounds like a song probably from the 1960s, probably by Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch, if anybody remembers those, or probably a very obscure record by the Moody Blues. But suffice to say, Sarah will be in the background, keeping an eye on questions that are actually coming through from the chat areas as well, because we want as many people involved as this as we possibly can. The reason being that joining me today will be Laura Stukey from over there in Atlanta, in Georgia, and we'll have Ali Stenton from Chesterfield, otherwise known as Little Britain. She's been telling us. Chesterfield is famous for many things, including a very, very strange spire that is bent as well. But we think it's probably a version of Royston Vasey, which, as I understand it, is probably in Leicestershire, which is quite nearby. Both Laura and Ali are long-time readers of my books, and are going to be asking me some questions about my work, and also telling you guys about what it is about my work that resonates with them, which is going to be surprising, somewhat embarrassing maybe for me, and various other things. But it's going to be a very interesting discussion here. So what I would like to do is, without further ado, if Laura and then Ali can describe who you are, how you came across my work, and then we'll start moving in from there.
Okay. All right. Am I on?
Okay. You're on indeed.
Okay, actually, my story, I'm an American. I've lived in Atlanta, Georgia for about the last 35 years and have my own business, which surprisingly has done well during this the virus, because I take care of people's pets and cook for them, and they still need that. So that's worked out okay for me. But really, my story began 7 years ago. When it becomes fascinating is when I actually found my first Anthony Peake book, and the way this happened is pretty amazing. It was about 7 years ago, almost to the day. I was driving down the road in my neighborhood, which is a quiet neighborhood. Very few cars go through. And right in front of me in the middle of the road was a little white dog. Now, this was very strange because this was a neighborhood where everyone, walked their dogs, and it was not anywhere you would dump a dog. And it was about this big. It was a little Maltese. And I jumped out and I'm like, what are you doing here, little baby? And he was groomed and he didn't have a collar. And I picked him up. This is horrible. This is not an outdoor dog. There's no way anyone would have ever kept this dog outdoors. They're about $2,000. And I picked him up and took him into the house with me. And I bonded with him because I found him. But of course, I tried to find his owner. For nearly a month, I went to see if he had a chip. I put up posters. I went to the shelters. And no one ever claimed the dog. So I became very, very close with this animal. It was like my baby. I don't have children. And I was in a relationship for 17 years that wasn't going anywhere. My relationship, the person who lost his job was really depressed. And I was sort of at the crossroads in my life. So I became really, really close to this dog. It was really and truly, I loved it more than I think I've ever loved anything, except my husband now. But up until that point, well, about 7 months later, the dog got violently ill, and it turns out it had a bowel obstruction, and it had eaten something, obviously from what I assume now is our trash can in the bathroom, because I found it tucked over. Anyway, I spent thousands of dollars to have an operation, and it died. And about 4 o'clock in the morning one night, the dog went in for the operation. I looked over at my phone. It was the veterinarian. Well, you don't get a call from your veterinarian at 4 in the morning if it's good news. So I knew that he had died. And I'm not trying to be morbid or anything. It was just the gravity of it. And I thought, oh my God, I'd never felt grief like that in my entire life, ever. It was all consuming. And I mean, I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink water. And days went by. I worked, but I just couldn't even function normally. And I thought, I'm never going to function again. And I was in that deep of sorrow. And after about a month, people were starting to get worried. They're like, you got to do something, and I'd try and eat some chicken broth. I couldn't. So I went to the library, as I always do, to get a book. And I thought, I've got to find out what happens when you die. So I checked out books on science and metaphysics and spirituality and all this. After about the third book, I turned to the back of one of the books and there was suggested authors. And in the middle of that, it says you might also want to read. The name Anthony Peake jumped out. And the only way I can explain it was, out of all the other names listed there of suggestions, I was sitting in the parking lot of the library. And I knew at that very moment, my life was going to change forever. I can't explain it. I can't explain it to this day. But at that moment, in the car, that very second, the words came into my head with my voice saying, your life is getting ready to change forever, and there's nothing you can do about it. But it wasn't a bad thing. I wasn't sitting there like, but it was so strong that I didn't know what was going to happen. And I had no idea why or when or how. And basically my life did change forever. And then I'll let Ali talk about, her situation with the books. And then I can go back at some point and explain how it did change, because that part of the story is way
okay.
long.
I'll just come in quickly there. Just one of the things that probably many people are aware of, the fact that I love my literature, and I think Ali will quite like this as well. And when you were mentioning about the dog and sorrow, I was reminded of Hotel New Hampshire by John Irving. And in that fantastic novel, there is Irving writes these wonderful phrases that he has in his books, and they resonate with you. And one of them there is sorrow floats. And what happens is there's a plane disaster, and there's a stuffed dog that was the family's dog, and the plane goes down and a lot of the family are killed. But the stuffed dog floats on the water, and it's found in the wreckage. And it's just wonderful. So when you said that, I thought, wow, it's John Irving's Sorrow Floats. But I just thought I'd bring that in. Okay, Ali, would you like to... Oh, Sarah, would you like to say something?
I was just going to say Hotel New Hampshire, also a very good film with Rob Lowe.
It is, isn't it? Hotel New Hampshire is...
in there.
Yeah, no, Hotel New Hampshire, great movie. You know what? My favourite novel of his is World According to Garp, and he told me that, well, he can tell me, he's written to say that that's unfilmable because it's such a wonderful book, but incredible. But we'll come back to that maybe, into John Irving and Sorrow Floats, and keep passing the open windows. So that's another one that's always stuck in my mind. Anyway, sorry, Ali, we're jumping in there. We're getting all literary, but please tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this mad world.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it must have been early 2014. And I used to work as a residential social worker, and I gave up the job to look after my granddaughter. And about a year in, I was thinking about going back to teaching, but I really wanted to write my own book. And I've always had this gnosis about the higher self. I don't believe in guardian angels. I don't believe there's something out there looking after us, but sometimes we get advice from ourselves. I love going to Oxfam. I love going to the charity shops, looking at the esoteric book section. And so I was in Oxfam one day, and I've got 3 little boys. Right, they were little at the time. They weren't with me. I was just making the most of an afternoon to myself. So I went into Oxfam, knew the guy behind the counter quite well, and he said a load of books have just come in. And he was letting me look at them before he'd even priced them up. And there were all sorts. There's plenty of books in Chesterfield, Buddhist books and everything else. And I was thinking I could do with doing some research on this book that I'm going to write about my higher self. And your book, Damon, the secret guide to your extraordinary, the extraordinary guide to your secret self. So I picked up this book. It's got like a male looking angel thing on the cover. And I thought, right, okay, I'll have this one. I think I gave him like 50p for it. But what was weird was, even coming home on the bus, started looking at this book and I thought, oh, bloody hell, he's written it. The book's already been written. And obviously the word demon was in there, being a Catholic girl. I was thinking, okay, is this demon with demon connotations? No, Damon, very different. So I'd already started reading it. And this is something that gets me about books, and your books in particular. I love reading books. I'm an English teacher. Your books are gripping. And when I say gripping, there's something where the kids can go hungry. You don't answer the phone. You have to read this book. So I was laughing to myself thinking, this is crazy. And I think it was that book, or it might be the next one, because I immediately ordered Is There Life After Death on Amazon. I think it was the last chapter of that one. You mentioned Timothy Freke, and that you'd been handed a book of Timothy Freke's, and there was a weird synchrondippity, I think you called it, in that book. And I was like, hang on, this is now getting a bit weird, because there was a message from Timothy Freke in my inbox. He's a friend of mine on Facebook. He was trying to get me to go down to one of his retreats at Glastonbury. And I'd actually not read the message because I was so busy reading Anthony's books. It had gripped me. And I thought, hang on, Anthony's writing in this book that he'd received an email from Timothy that day. I've received Facebook Messenger message from Timothy today. And in it all, and I love, there's no such thing as coincidence. That's my belief. So then I looked into that and I said to Timothy, hang on a minute, I've got hold of this guy randomly in a charity shop and he's written the book I wanted to write. So that saved me some trouble. And obviously you had a lot more to yours and now he's talking about you. And so that's when it started. I think that's as far as I need to go.
Again,
absolutely. Yeah.
Quite peculiar here because Tim and I have long discussed working together on various things, and we thought, the similarity of our names, the Freke Peake show, it sort of has this kind of ring to it in some way. And we did an event with a mutual friend of Sarah and I's, Jade Shaw. We were both interviewed for Jade's fantastic documentary on the out-of-body experience. And both Tim and I were interviewed. And Tim and I were both involved in the launch event at the Rio Cinema in Dalston in East London around about 18 months ago. And Tim, at that stage, we thought, we really need to work together because Tim is such a huge personality. I mean, he is just extraordinary. I've never seen a speaker like him. But he's an extraordinary, intelligent man as well, and well-read. And his book, The Jesus Mysteries, which he wrote with Peter Gandy, which again is bizarre here, because Tim Freke, whose name sounds like, and he wrote a book with Peter Gandy, and my ex-common-law wife, my ex-wife, one for better term, her surname was Gandy. And, there's all these kind of, and of course, then there's somebody called Gandy involved in our group as well. So it's all these kind of wheels within wheels, you find, it's extraordinary.
I quoted that. That's my quote, wheels within wheels. Remember when I made that up?
Right. Yeah. So go on, back to you, Laura.
Okay, well, so I think I can get into now as to how extreme my life did change. Okay, first of all, I thought, I've got to find this guy's book. Okay, now there were no books in America by you at the time because that was 7 years ago. And the book I was looking for was your first book, Is There Life After Death? Luckily, I found it on Amazon. I was new to Amazon and new to Facebook, and I read it. And I read it in one sitting, one day. And I remember sitting there and suddenly the sorrow from the death of my dog, which, it was lifted, but not, it was like, I thought I've got something to hold on to now, something that gives me a hope, I think would be the best word. And I went to Taco Bell and I ate 2 tacos. That was about the first thing I had eaten in a month. I swear, if people think you can't go 30 days without food, trust me, sorrow will do it for you, because I couldn't even get down chicken broth. I was that sad. Anyway, went to Taco Bell, got 2 tacos, and I thought, okay, everything's going to be all right. But then I thought, I've got to meet this person, and I wasn't actually meaning meet in person. I just thought I've got to meet them on Facebook, which was you, Anthony. And so I sent you a friend request, which you didn't accept probably right away. You wouldn't have known who I was, or I could have been a kook. And a couple of months went by. And I was friending friends of yours that I started talking to, and you know who these people are, and started getting involved in a lot of the chat things and stuff. That was on back then on Facebook. We were on for days talking about something, quantum physics or something, and, just one topic that went on for days and days. But anyway, at that point, I thought, this guy's got to answer my Facebook request. And it was Christmas by this time. And I was at my parents' house in Fayetteville, Arkansas, of all places, Christmas Eve, 7 years ago. And I looked down and you accepted my friend request. Now, I don't know what you were doing on Facebook on Christmas Eve, okay? Because it would have been pretty late there, I think. And my mom and dad are elderly. They would have been about 75 at the time. And I went running around my mom's house. Anthony Peake just accepted my friend request. They don't even know what Facebook is, okay? Or, let alone Anthony Peake. I didn't care about my Christmas presents. I didn't care about Christmas dinner. And I just sat there and I thought, he accepted my friend request. And at that point, you had a forum, remember? And I used to write things on the forum and everything but it was sort of, we weren't really actually talking until at one point you put up a post that you were going to be in Milan at the New Science Paradigm. And I said, how do I get there? And can I come? And can you get me a ticket? Remember that?
Yeah.
And you probably were thinking, what's going on here? Well, I was in a relationship at the time. I'd been in, as you call, not a marriage, but 17 years. And then it had become really unhappy. And so I felt like I was going to be able to go to Milan, and he knew how about your books. And I said, I'm going to Milan to meet Anthony Peake. And he was like, okay. And so in the meanwhile, I started talking to a lot of your friends who turns out to be friends with my now husband, who is British, who grew up in the same place on the Wirral as Anthony. It's just absolutely bizarre. Okay. Now I ended up meeting him because I went to Milan, met Anthony, it was like Ali and I were talking last night. It was like meeting Elvis, the literary Elvis. And I remember I was sitting in the stands and you walked up and you shook my hand and I was like, I'm going to faint. Anyway. But in the meanwhile, I had met someone who's now my husband, who is a chef, and I'm a chef as well, a personal chef as well as a pet sitter. And we started chatting, and it just was platonic. And he was like, why don't you come on over to Liverpool and I'll introduce you to a bunch of people. And some of these people are Anthony and I's mutual friends, but I won't mention names. And I flew there, and basically I fell in love with the person I'm married to now. And I had to go back to Atlanta, get out of my 17-year relationship, which was not easy. But for some unknown reason, he understood. Because that's another part of the Peake experience is the people that are associated with you, they sort of get it. Even though they're not in the group, they get it. Even like my husband, Pete, now, he's not in like what I call our wheel within wheels, but he understands that I am, and he's okay with it. Because normally, if you go to your spouse and say, well, I think I'm going to go talk to this guy on Messenger about, an Anthony Peake book, normally your husband would go, well, what's that all about? But he doesn't care because he knows it's about this experience. And that I find fascinating. I think about that all the time, is that the people around you, they sort of know you're in this group, but they don't have a problem with it.
Because it's extraordinary here as well, isn't it? And again, it's something that Sarah will be aware of here, is that it was literally, I think it was yesterday or the day before, Sarah, wasn't it, where we met up in London to discuss our Alice in Wonderland plans. And we were going to be doing an event based around Alice in Wonderland. And the three of us met up in London, and we linked up with one of our friends over in Northern Ireland with the plan of doing this. Now, I then subsequently discover via Laura that Pete's mother is she the president of the Alice in Wonderland Society or something?
Yeah, she's like the big chairman, and they write the news. Her husband, Pete's dad, writes the newsletter. She actually did a book, which I can walk over and get it and show it to you. Well, I'll never get to it in time. But she wrote the book that has all the illustrations of Lewis Carroll, and then they go to this place. Where did I tell you it was? It's in a small town.
Yeah,
somewhere.
The place near Warrington, the one near Warrington.
Yeah, and they go and they have meetings and everything. They talk about Lewis Carroll.
Daresbury.
Yep. And then, of course, I sent you all these pictures of all the things that she has pictures of Lewis Carroll when he was young and stories that may or may not be true. And I was able to pretty much send you all that information. And she even said that she would let you know when the next meeting was. But then, of course, we got COVID and everything sort of went by the wayside. But again, she's still available to talk to about if you guys want to do that. And very interesting lady, has her own radio show in the Wirral called Under the Duvet. You may have heard of it. Mm-hmm. It comes on Friday nights. And she's also an artist and a clothes designer, but she knows more about Alice in Wonderland and Lewis and Carroll than anyone, I think, probably in Britain for sure. So that's another synchronicity.
Exactly. Well, I think that Sarah, Sam, and Emma and myself, we need to link up with her really on this in terms of the future, because didn't we, Sarah? We got quite enthusiastic about that at one stage, and we still would like to do that, I think.
Yeah, I think that Alice in Wonderland for a lot of people is that kind of first experience of altered states of consciousness. I know that for me personally, it was probably the first narrative story that I got really into, because it was all about exploring dream worlds. And I realized that actually pretty much my whole life has been kind of influenced by Alice in Wonderland. And I think that's true of loads of people.
Yeah, very true. Okay, Ali, we're coming back to you then in terms of the second instalment of your Peake experience. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? It sounds like I'm incredibly vain here.
Yeah, no, it's
searching for compliments,
No, buying tickets for it. And I have lots of questions as well for you, Anthony. I do have to say that, because what I'm interested in, until I found your Damon book, I thought I was the only person who had attributed all these guardian angel sort of things to it's just another part of me. But a part of me that's always calm and always kind of knows always kind of knows, and sometimes will let me land in the SHIT, but sometimes will give me a split-second warning. And I've had like Gnosis about this and bothered people for years and read every book. So can I ask you a question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so my question is, I'm going to try and word this simply. So when did you first believe/suspect that we all have a daemon? Because everything started with you. So where did that originate?
I think there were a series of extraordinary coincidences, synchronicities, or as you know, I call them synchrondipities, that took place when I was writing the first book, which were beyond comprehension or understanding. And I'll show you one of them now if I can find the book, because it will be here. I've probably shown this before, but not that one. Right, okay. Around about 1988, something like that, 1989 maybe, I was on holiday in an island called Symi in Greece, which Sarah may know. It's an island off-roads. Regular island. I've been going there for many, many years. And I was in a small resort called Pedi. And I was at that time, for some reason, reading The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. And as I got up to go for my lunch, I decided that I'd finish reading at one particular point, which I finished reading. And then I'm just checking to make sure, finished reading it and then went for my lunch. Didn't think anything else of it. Then many years later, I'm doing research on the first book. And on the first book, I was particularly interested because, as you guys know, I do a lot of the science. I don't just do the gee whiz, I've had these wonderful experiences stuff. I do the science. And I was particularly interested in mitochondrial DNA because I was quite intrigued about the idea of how maybe memory can be carried through the female line in terms of history. Now, in terms of mitochondrial DNA is quite different to normal DNA. And as I say, it's only carried through the female line. And I'm thinking to myself, I need to know more about this. Now, if you look around here, I have quite a vast library. It goes down the side there as well. There's just books everywhere in my house and bookcases everywhere. This is just the tip of the iceberg, really. And I thought, who will have written about mitochondrial DNA? And I thought, well, of course, Richard Dawkins, I have all his books. He's a biologist. It's probably him. So I go to the book. And I pick up the book and I pick up The Blind Watchmaker. And I think, yes, this is probably it. And as I picked it up, there's one thing you need to know. I never, ever dog-ear pages of books. I never do it. I hate it. My books are pristine and I want to keep them that way. So I have pieces of paper stuck in things. So I pick up this book. And as I open it, I notice something really strange. I flick through it. Guarantee I won't find it now. And I find one page that's dog-eared. That one. See the dog ear at the top? Sorry, that side. The dog ear at the top. I then read down the page and a voice in my head said, this is for you. This is a clue. This is for you. And in one of my later books, I call it The Footprints in the Snow, the evidence for the daemon, the footprints in the snow. And I read down, and this was before I'd written the book or anything. I was just doing research, and I read down, and he says, he's going on about cells of plants and chloroplasts. Mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA. And I just looked and I thought, wow, what's the chances of me dog-earing that book 10 years before at random for no reason? An earlier version myself just decided to do that. So I looked into the back of the book. It's the only reference that Richard Dawkins makes for mitochondria. But not only that, it's the only reference he makes in any of his other books. So my earlier self had literally left a clue to say, I'm here, mate, and I'm guiding you now. You need to listen to me, and you need to listen carefully to where I guide you. And literally from then on, the book wrote itself. The book literally,
yes,
I was given guidance to it. And things just happened. Books were supplied to me by chance. at one stage, I was keeping the reference of all the incredible coincidences. And I'll give you one more because this just shows how it works. We're in a bookshop second-hand bookshop in Cheltenham. My brother-in-law used to live in Cheltenham. We were in a second-hand bookshop. Now, my wife is very grounded. She doesn't do all this stuff. You know, she's a mathematician. She likes the maths, and she's very structured. And she turned around to me and she said, you know, you go on about you're being guided to write this book. And I said, yes. And she said, it's nonsense. And she said, let's test it now. She said, what book are you reading at the moment? Now, there were books piled high that was in no order. And I said, and I swear I had not read this at all or seen the books. And I said, you know, I need a biography of William Blake. And she went, oh, for Christ's sake. She put her hand out. Right in her eye line was a biography of William Blake, which is probably up there. And she threw it across the shop. She was so annoyed, she threw it across the shop. Now, that's the kind of daemon guidance that you have. Now, who did I discover the name the daemon from?
Yeah.
Tim Freke.
No way.
Tim Freke talks about the daemon. And this is again going to really shake you, this.
Yes.
Tim Freke's book, The Jesus Mysteries, has a whole section on Gnosticism and specifically on the daemon. And immediately after reading that book, which was a birthday present from my mother-in-law, I read it in a place called Parga in the Peloponnese in Greece. And when I read that book, I thought, this is significant. And when I got back, I contacted Tim. And we've been friends ever since.
That's amazing, because that year, Tim, bless his heart, I was looking after my granddaughter. I wasn't working. He was trying to give me a place on his retreat for free. I mean, how kind is that? And I just couldn't make it. But I've always been fascinated by the Gnostics, and I did theology A-level. So I've always had this thing in my head of gnosis. I just know stuff, not to tell other people, not in a psychic medium sense.
I thought that because you used the term gnosis earlier on, which I thought was a peculiar thing to say.
Fascinated with the Gnostics.
Alice.
Yes.
Ali, tell Anthony before I forget, because we talked about this last night, about your, whatever you want to call it, premonition about the baby being smothered. And then he will tell you the story about when Penny was falling down the stairs, because this is incredible.
I've actually had a few of these. So I think the one I'm going to go to is when Charlie was very poorly, because his dad, when I was on the phone to Laura last night, his dad dropped Charlie off. We're not together anymore. And he confirmed that this really happened. So Charlie was born 10 weeks early, and he was very ill in hospital with bronchial pneumonia. And they sent him home. He was still poorly. And Henry was looking after him. So he was still 2 months premature. I'd gone to have a bath, desperate. Just 5 minutes to myself. The minute I stepped in the bath, and what's interesting for me is I believe my daemon is male. It's a male voice. Said,
very important. Yeah,
yes.
It tends to be the opposite sex.
Right. Said, his lips are blue. Jumped out of the bath, ran down the stairs. I said to Henry, his lips are blue. Henry said he's fine. He's asleep, meaning the baby, little baby on his shoulder, pulled Charlie back. His lips were blue. And it was the winter of 2009, 2010. The snow was terrible. We had to phone an ambulance. The ambulance, was it going to come? Henry and I were both determined we were going to the hospital. This gets weirder. My dad, who also has gnosis, turned up. My dad never comes out in the car in his snow. He said, something's wrong. What is it? I said, we're trying to get an ambulance for Charlie. His lips are blue. I think his oxygen, by the time they arrived, had gone down to 30%. My dad said, I will look after the other children. Just get to the hospital. So that's one thing where I've had that voice. The other one, which Laura was taken with, my granddaughter, she was 5 pounds when she was born. And I had my daughter, her boyfriend, and my granddaughter. They were living in the lounge. And I'd gone to bed. I was the one really looking after the baby, but I'd left them with the baby. 4 o'clock in the morning, something woke me up. My male voice, my daemon, who I call Gethel, which is another story, said, she's squashed now. Okay, she's squashed now. So I ran downstairs to the lounge, and Nathan had got the baby on his chest, and he turned into the sofa, and she was squashed between him and the sofa. She was very, very hot. So I just pulled her out. Now, I know it sounds silly. I don't actually see those things in themselves as extraordinary, because my dad's always had this, and so had his mother. But when I used to meditate a lot and first read your daemon book, I decided to ask the daemon its name. And I just got the word Gethel. I thought, I've never heard of Gethel. When I Googled it, there's actually an angel Gethel who is the keeper of all hidden knowledge. And I thought, right, that's even weirder. And obviously, I think all of us have got lots of these examples, but for me, they're life-saving moments. So I think when I've lived this life before, I probably didn't step out the bath that day and sort Charlie out. I probably didn't, she's getting squashed now. I probably didn't respond to that call to go downstairs. But it's so urgent. I don't just mean there was a voice and then I decide to move. I mean, literally, it's like something It's like you're throwing yourself out the bath and you're flying down the stairs without even thinking about it. Now, I know Anthony's story about Penny and the falling down the stairs, but is that it's the same thing, isn't it? But it's your own personal directive. And it's super important. You know, those two children, they would not have been here now.
Which meant, wouldn't it, there would have been you'd have been in a different world, a different universe in so many different ways. So clearly, you know, in your last run through the Bohemian IMAX, you know, the simulation we live within, which we live over and over again and change as we move on, like a third-person computer game. The daemon effectively is your game player. Your daemon is the part of you that remembers from last time and decides and thinks, you know what I'm going to do this time? I'm going to make sure that the baby doesn't die. And I want to see what happens when that happens and carry it through. Now, in terms of my own experience in terms of this, you know, it is one of the things I cannot even get my mind around. A little bit of background. My wife is much younger than me. My wife is 18 years younger than me. So, you know, there's quite a big age difference. So sometimes, although she tells me off for this, I sometimes father her rather than treat her as a wife, you know, in things which I shouldn't do, but it's the way I am really. But I was on Wirral. I was living on Wirral, living in a place called Spittle, which is what you expect to rate, a place called Spittle. Sorry, I couldn't avoid that one. It's actually quite a nice suburb. But anyway, I was sitting in my study one Sunday morning, and it's downstairs. I'm looking out, and I suddenly hear Penny scream. Now, being me, it's natural. My natural assumption was, and I sat there thinking about this, and I thought, she screamed. What's the problem? I know. It's a spider in the bath. She needs help. There's a spider. She's seen a spider and she's going hysterical or something. So I decide to stand up, and then suddenly I find myself standing up and running towards the foot of the stairs. So my study is here, and then around about, I don't know, 15 feet in one direction, there was a straight staircase coming down from upstairs. I get up and I start to run to the foot of the stairs to see Penny in midair coming down towards me, literally in midair. She wasn't in contact with anything. I managed to have time to calculate how she was going to fall, and I managed to catch her head literally in the palm of my hand. And I remember thinking, now what do I do? I move the hand up here to catch her head. And then I caught her, because she was quite slim, quite slight. And I caught her, and literally my hand then bashed down onto the doorstop, the edge round the door, as you can see the door behind me there, the kind of the edge, the sharp edge, which then went into the back of my hand. She would have been killed. She would have hit that with the corner of her temple. It probably would have killed her. Now, we sat for about 5 minutes shaking after that, because it was such a shock. And it was only then I turned around to her and I said, when did you scream? And she said, I screamed when I started falling. And I said, that's impossible. That's impossible. You couldn't have screamed as you were falling, because I had time to hear you scream, think about the significance of your scream, think about the spiders, think, oh, isn't it silly? Then stand up, then start running to get to the bottom of the stairs to see you in midair where your fall was starting.
Right. Amazing.
Now, to me, that meant that something extraordinary had happened with time.
Yes, that's what I was going to bring up. There's something about our daemon when we're in the flow and we're listening to him, in my case, that bends not only our perception of time, but can for other people. I've got an instance of my baby Jessica 25 years ago, chatting on the phone to a friend. There's no way I could hear her starting to fall down the stairs, managed to get from the kitchen through the lounge to the bottom of the stairs. There was concrete at the bottom, and catch her. She was 13 months old, just bouncing down the stairs. She would have died too. But what struck me afterwards was not the instinct to run and get her, even though it was quite silent what was happening, was how did my higher self bend time to allow that to happen? And when me and my dad have been in like car crashes or whatever, time gets bent. So is our daemon doing that for us to give us the time, or is that power within ourselves? And that's what led me then to your Labyrinth of Time book, because you only get book to Anthony Peake's books when you're supposed to. You only get the order that you're supposed to receive. And I've read that book 3 times and it still bends my mind.
I've read it.
So yeah, and the same with the infinite mind field, and that's another thing again led on after that. So how do you feel, Anthony, about, I believe we have a daemon, we're all here believing the same thing, this bending of time is quite dramatic, and super strength, things like that?
Well, it was something, funnily enough, I was only writing today about time perception, and I think I posted something on Facebook about it, and the way in which time is the only thing that's measured by itself. You can have a pound of apples, but you can only ever have a minute of a minute. So I have no idea whether your minute is an equivalent to my minute, unless there is a time that we measure time by. And I've used the argument many times, it's not original, but the idea that time is like a river, as Marcus Aurelius said, it's a river that flows. But the logic then falls down, because if the river flows, the only reason you know a river is flowing because it's relative to the banks of the river. You see the river flowing against the banks. But time doesn't have any time to measure itself against, because time can only be measured by time. And this is where John William Dunne came up with his idea of serial time, that there are times, there's time 1, there's time 2, there's time 3, and they're all different levels of times. And John William Dunne argued that within each version of time, there's a version of you. So that was almost an early version of my daemon concept, the idea that there is a daemon outside of time. And again, I'm reminded here of the movie Interstellar, where the central character sees the whole life of his daughter in the famed Tesseract sequence in Interstellar, right, where the way he looks back in time, goes through the bookcase, pushes the book out so his daughter recognizes it. So it seems that the daemon is outside of time. And again, Philip K. Dick had this term orthogonal time, time at a right angle to this time. And maybe that's where the daemon is, because of course, if you are a game player, you can fast forward within the game sometimes. You see the game on the CD-ROM. Mm-hmm. You see the whole thing. Right. Now, Laura, you mentioned something similar about a time slip that you had, I think, yesterday when we were talking.
Oh, yeah. And yeah, this happened a long time ago. And I'm going to say even 20 something years ago, before I had read your books. And I've tried to convince people for years that it happened. And you're fine, I've just given up. But I was with someone, and we were going to Memphis on our way to Arkansas. And we decided to take a weekend detour to a small town called Tunica, which is about 20 miles outside of Memphis, Tennessee. They have casinos there. And the only reason casinos are allowed there is because it's on a river and you have to be on water. So we thought, we'll go there for Friday and Saturday and then head on up to Arkansas. So we got there on a Friday evening at about 5 o'clock. The sun was going down, and checked into the hotel, got our rooms to the bag, and thought, let's go down and play a couple of hands of blackjack before we go to the buffet or whatever. We had nothing to drink, so there's nothing like that involved. And we sat down at the blackjack table, and that's the last thing I remember until the next day. And this is what's so incredible about this story, is it's two people. So I basically have a witness. The next day, I was awake and on the second level of the casino, looking down on the casino, because that's how casinos are. You go up and you look down at the casino. And it was all glass up there. And it was morning, or it was like around 11 o'clock. And the sunlight was morning light. And I stood there, and the person I was with stood there, and we turned to each other. And at the exact same moment, we both go, "What day is it?" And I mean, it was the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. And I've sort of just it was so long ago, I just think about it like, wow, can you believe that happened? Did not know what a time slip was, had no idea. And we both just sat there, and I said, "It's morning." And we went to the front desk, and the girl at the front desk, I remember walking up and I go, "What day is it? And what time is it?" There's no clocks in casinos because they don't want you to know what time it is, so you'll keep gambling. And it was before smartphones. So she just looked at me, I'm sure she thought we were drunk. And she goes, "Well, it's Saturday at 11:30. So an entire night up until 11:30 the next morning disappeared from me and my friend's brain. Gone. It did not exist. Now, we remembered that we had where the room was. I had my purse in my bag. It was all full of money, to gamble. So I wasn't robbed. we later told people, said, "Oh, you just got slipped the date rape drug." I said, "No, I haven't got money, my wallet, everything. I obviously wasn't raped." And we were standing there, and I've told the story to 1,000 people, and they're just, "All right," but it happened, and I have a witness because it happened to two of us at exactly the same time.
That is the important point, isn't it? The idea that you have a witness. Now, you may recall that in my book, The Labyrinth of Time, I cite an example that took place many years ago with a friend of mine, Richard Fleming. And Richard and his friend were working at the hop farms in Kent. A pair of hippies, and they'd work the summer and everything else as well. And that particular evening, they'd done their work shift, and they decided that they would jump in the car and they'd drive the mile down the road to the village. Was it Badminton? I can't remember. It's somewhere like that, somewhere on the Kent-Sussex border. And anyway, they get in the car, 5-minute drive. They get in, they go into the pub, they sit down, they order a pint of beer and sit down, and they hadn't sipped it beer when Richard's friend says, "Look at the time." They'd lost an hour and a half. And both of them said, "Where did we go? How did that happen?" So the question is here, what happens in these circumstances? Do we just have a segue of our life just gets taken out?
Right, like a slice.
Yeah, like a slice.
Of it.
And of course, if we talk about the quantum physics of this and the idea of Minkowski's time, Minkowski and the slices of time, this is exactly it. That we misunderstand time. Time is processed by our brains in one way or another. Time is not external to ourselves, but that doesn't explain how, relative to ourselves, we can slip into nowhere. And it's when it's witnessed. But of course, we do it with anesthetics, don't we? You have an anesthetic, you have a total anesthetic, and you go. And as Stuart Hamerhoff, in his research, in his work into orchestrated objective reduction, has argued, what happens to consciousness at that point? It seems that consciousness is just eradicated, disappears, as if there's no loss of time. It's just bang, bang, go down, bang, and you're back. And this, it's such a common occurrence. The amount of people who've written to me about these type of things. Jenny Randalls and her associate, a guy called Huff, I think it was, wrote a book on time slips. And there were so many of them. And of course, one of the major areas of time slips, as Laura, you may know, is the bottom of Bold Street in Liverpool.
Yes.
It's extraordinary for what happens there.
I remember the story. And you've told several stories about that. And actually, you want to hear what's even weirder than that?
Go on.
Pete's mom's gallery was on Bold Street, her art gallery. Of course. Yeah. Yep.
Wheels within wheels.
Yeah, and it was there for 20 years, just closed 2 years ago, and she had a private viewing every Wednesday night, and Pete served wine, and I've been there. I have several pictures, and I'm sure you would probably even know the gallery if you had been there at the time, but everybody, people that Billy Butler and all these people, they all came. And that's another thing this is just a little offshoot here, is that Pete's mom, because of the work that she's in, and Anthony, is on radio shows, and she has a radio show, she knows all these people that which is even weirder because that's not just Pete, that's Pete's mom. Wow. So that's another wheel within a wheel.
And do you know, when I used to be doing the regular show on Radio Merseyside with Billy, that's where I used to spend my time before the show. I would always go to Bold Street and have a coffee in Waterstones at the bottom of Bold Street. And one of the time slips was actually in Waterstones. The Waterstones I used to go in was one of the time slips that I think Sleeman, there's a Scouse writer called Sleeman that writes about these things. Sarah, have you got any examples of this in your world?
My experiences of that, I've often put down to being in a trance state or an altered state of consciousness. And Ali, you reminded me of, especially when kids are involved and especially small babies, your mind is kind of extra primed and alert.
Yeah.
And I've had the experience a lot of when my daughter was a baby of hearing her cry. And then I wonder whether I hear her cry in my sleep, but I'm not aware that I've already heard it. And then I hear her cry later on. But I do think that when you're in a trance state or an altered state, and that trance state could be driving because you kind of zone out a little bit, or it could be being on your computer, being in a book. Also like extreme experiences of trauma or anxiety. I had an experience where I was, I'd been swimming around Brighton Pier the old ruined one. And I'd done it one day, and it was like a beautiful, calm, mirror-like day. And then I thought I'd do it again the next day, but it was just a bit choppier and there were quite strong currents in the water. And I got to the end of the pier and this boat went past me, and the wash from this boat pushed me into the pier. And I realised I was starting to panic a little bit and that I needed to like stop and calm down. So I went to the pier and I grabbed hold of one of the kind of steel girders that make the pier up, but it was all obviously covered in barnacles, and I started lacerating myself on this steel girder. And I thought, if I panic now and I get worried, I'm probably going to die, because I came to the beach on my own. There was no one watching me from the shore. And so I sort of spent a bit of time just like trying to not get too cut up and like laughing about what a ridiculous situation I was in so I could calm down. And then I sort of slowly made my way back. But that whole day, it wasn't even the point when I felt my life was threatened. I realised later on that whole day, suddenly every single aspect of it was like crystal clear. And I remember like listening to something on the radio before I went swimming, that even that, the story in that seemed somehow really poignant and apt to my experience of swimming around the pier. It was about someone dying in a car crash, and someone watching the car crash and couldn't look at the person who was dying. So instead looked at a Coke can in the gutter that was emptying its contents out into the street, and just this sense that they were watching their life ebb away. And then when I'd got back onto the shore, I had this weird experience where I thought I saw jewels on the beach. I was like properly kind of out of it, and I stretched my hand out to pick up these jewels, and it was actually all the guts and entrails of a dead pigeon. And then a couple of days later, I remember seeing this billboard sign for like advertising the Argus newspaper saying that someone died. And I thought, what if that's me and I'm a ghost? And that was ages afterwards. It was like it probably expanded my experience. But I think that when you're in a trance state, for whatever reason, we experience an expansion of time, maybe because we retreat into ourselves consciously rather than stretching ourselves out into our surroundings.
I suppose as a subjective experience, that's possibly the case, but, you know, as I can accept that, and I think that's a very reasoned argument. But when you have two people experiencing the same thing, you're dealing with a folie à deux. And the issue then is how did two people share the same experience? But of course, it could be if consciousness is non-local in some way.
I was just going to say that, yeah. I was listening to Dean Radin yesterday talking to Jeffrey Mishlove on New Thinking Aloud, and he was talking about the new study of the non-local elements of consciousness, and that perhaps that might be the new kind of scientific development of the study of consciousness will probably have something to do with exploring on a quantum level the non-local elements of that kind of entanglement.
As a bit of information here, I have my own developing hypothesis here, which I really need to discuss with Dean at some stage in the future, whereby I'm arguing that the human brain does work on non-local nature, but also it's nothing to do with the neurons, and it's to do with the glial cells within the brain. Because the glial cells, you know, when people turn around and say that we only use 10% of our brains, what they really mean by this is that 10% of our brains are neurons and 90% of our brains are glial cells. And neurologists have always puzzled as to what the function of the glial cells are, because the word glial means German, is glue in German. And the argument was the glial cells just hold the neurons in place. But recent discoveries have shown that there is something peculiar about the glial cells. Now, nature doesn't do that. It doesn't profligate things. You know, it just doesn't multiply things, and it doesn't need them. So clearly the glial cells have some function, and there's something called the calcium wave, which seems to be a kind of a wave of information that flows through the brain non-locally. Now, could it be that the non-local communications of the brain are in fact the glial cells? And in which case this would explain...
Anthony, let me, before you go, after you get done talking that, let me talk about why Ali and I believe that you have written these books that have touched so many people, because that has something to do with how things come into your brain. But remind me after you finish.
You know, that's fine. That was the point I was just going to make, was just the way in which, you know, I'm trying to come up with scientific solutions. I mean, I've written something today which I'm not going to share at the moment because I need to research it a little bit more. But if I'm right, it's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And nobody spotted it, which
Can
is,
I just say, Sorry, Anthony, you do mention this, don't you, in your Hidden Universe book? Because I was having a look at it last night.
I do.
And I only told Laura for the first time about experiences I had when I was 3. And then you talk about children. And is it the glial around the neurons that's finally sealed at around the age of 15?
It's not the glial. That is the actual coating of the neurons themselves.
But you were saying that coating,
the myelin coating.
Myelin is not completely sealed in children up to the age of 15, and that could be how they receive non-local information.
Yeah, the idea that because the neurons of the brain are open to probably picking up the messages, the non-local messages surrounding them within the glial cells, because the myelin has not developed, they're not insulated in the same way. So therefore the insulation isn't there. So there's leakage inwards and outwards from the neurons themselves.
Yes.
Now, again, I would counter argue this, that again, if people know my work, and you guys do, I do the science. I'm not just somebody that plucks this out the air. There is also, in terms of Alzheimer's disease. Now, what Alzheimer's disease does is they have amyloid plaques in the brain, and these amyloid plaques destroy the microtubules within the neuronal structures, and they literally explode them. Now, effectively, what you have elderly people who start to have the same kind of experiences that young people have. So you'll have an elderly person who will have what's called Charles Bonnet Syndrome, where they'll be seeing little creatures and people like my mother did. But then you get children having the same thing with the Michael Hallowell Invisi-Kids or the Quasi-Corporeal Companions that he develops. And I think it's the same phenomenon. We're just misinterpreting it. They're the same thing. And what people are not doing, and to my delight, because I'm trying to join the dots, and if other people had joined the dots, it wouldn't be me joining the dots. But I think there's dots to be joined here. I think they're related. And I think they are the same phenomenon, just being interpreted in different ways. But that was an excellent point.
Ali, tell Anthony about your experience with the Greys.
Have we got time?
No, we can go on as long as we like, guys. We stick to an hour. We can go on as long as we like. We normally go, Sarah, we normally go on for 2 hours, 2.25 hours sometimes.
So my dad always used to ask me about my dreams, and I always had very vivid dreams and always drew pictures afterwards. And my dad's very interested in Jungian psychology, so it makes sense looking back now. From the age of 3, right, I try and describe this. Couldn't sleep as a child, as an insomniac. Baby, I was put on Valium and all sorts. But I loved going to bed and having hours not being able to sleep. On particular nights, would close my eyes and I would go down what I call tunnels. They're like rings of light that would come up, but I felt as if I was going down. My body would feel very buzzy, which is a strange, I can't how to describe it. And then there'd be something like a ring in my brain, and I knew that I'd be going home. So home was quite often. I can't describe the surroundings very well. So there was about 4, they call them Greys now, but to me, they were my family. Not very tall, huge almond eyes, no nose slits, but no mouth. I know some people have read about a mouth. All communication was telepathic. Now, the first time it happened to me that I remember vividly and told my dad about, they had me back and they were doing some work on me. And it was like a warm copper table that I was kind of stuck to without anything tying me down, and they were doing something in my nether regions and something around the back where my kidneys are. And the only thing I can describe it and it was really loving and nice, and like I was having a bit of a tune up, and I came out of it very, Laura, I hate you for making me bring this up, quite sexually aroused. Okay. I was quite sexually aroused at the age of 3. Told my dad all about it, and he got me drawing the picture of the aliens, and he didn't say much to me about the feelings down there that I had. And I used to get lots of these dreams, but it was always premeditated with, I knew I was going to go home with the tunnels and the buzzing and the body and the ring, that kind of sound that would go on in my head. Drew lots of pictures of them. We're talking 3 years old, 1978. My dad's got these pictures, and I'm thinking, it was before E.T. I'd never seen Marvin the Martian. I can't recall of anything consciously that would have had me choose these creatures as, and they weren't scary, which I know some people think the Greys are scary. What was the other bit I was going to sort of round it off with? That was it. And then in your book, which I didn't finish the first time, and I picked it up a few days ago knowing that we were going to be talking, and I thought, yeah, this is a little bit strange, because your mum with Charles Bonnet Syndrome, and I think you said the Grey in her experience was surprised to see her. It was very much put across to me telepathically. I was not to go around talking to people about this. So we bring it around to, I was 17 years old and I was rushed into hospital with a very bad kidney infection, really bad. Turns out I've got a duplex kidney, an extra tube running from my kidney to my bladder on the left-hand side. And what's funny is, in those experiences in dream world, the greys were always to my left-hand side, trying to work on sorting something out that I knew was a tubular issue. And I'd equated it afterwards to something to do with the sex organs. I don't think it was. And it's interesting because that kidney issue, when I had my last scan 10 years ago, has righted itself. The tube has reattached and everything seems to be better. So I kind of think as if I came in with this congenital kidney defect, that they were working on it. But the knowledge that to keep things to myself was something that's been really strongly presented to me. And I think as a child, I used to think, well, if I tell people, they might think I'm crazy. So I'd only tell my dad about all this stuff. But when I look back now, I think, how could a 3-year-old have had this experience that's throughout thousands of years of history amongst millions of people across the world? It doesn't make sense. But for me, that these were family. I looked forward to the dreams when I would go back and see them.
Anthony, tell her how your mother was the same situation. I remember you telling me that she would have had no idea what an alien was. She couldn't have made it up. Remember?
No, absolutely not. I mean, my mother was just not that kind of person. You know, she just was not interested in these kind of things at all. She was very much, she loved her history novels and her history. She just wasn't interested in anything like this. And there's two things I'd like to mention about my mother, which I'll mention this the next thing as well, because it'll tie us on to something else we can talk about. But she phoned me up one evening, and she said something quite peculiar happened. Now, again, knowing the geography of Wirral, you probably know I was brought up on a place called Bromberpool Village, which is it's near Port Sunlight, but we had it's quite an isolated community, quite a peculiar place, quite interesting historically. But she was coming home with my aunt. They were both widows. They'd both been recently widowed, and they were walking onto the village. And my aunt stopped to tie her shoelace. And as she stopped to tie her shoelace, my mother looked over towards a place called Price's Factory, which used to be there. And my mother said, now what's interesting is my mother had lost her left eye with malignant melanoma about 3 or 4 years before, and she was developing cataracts in her other eye, so she was partially sighted. And she said she looked over towards the factory and she saw what she described as being a smoke ring. And she saw the smoke ring, and she said it kind of started to rotate, then it became more solid, and then suddenly shot off at vast speed towards North Wales. So it was sort of going in that direction. Now, what is interesting about this is when I posted this on Facebook, there's a lady, one of my friends from the Wirral, called Morrigan Hawkins. And Morrigan posted about this a few weeks later because she said, you told your story about your mother. She said, I know what she saw because I saw it. I was on a bus going along the A41 over the White Bridge on the A41. And she said, I saw that object fly over. So we know it was something in objective 3-dimensional space. It wasn't something she'd imagined. So she said, what did I see? And I said, I don't know, Mum, could have been an aircraft, could have been anything, don't worry about it. Anyway, my aunt then goes home, and either the next day or 2 days later, my mother phones me up first thing in the morning. She's hysterical. And I said, Mum, what's the matter? And she said, I don't know what happened to me. She said, it was terrifying. And I said, explain to me. And she said, well, I live on my own. I always close my bedroom door. She said, I woke up in the middle of the night, and she said, I felt, and it's the way she described it, she said, I felt like something was sitting on my chest. So immediately I thought sleep paralysis. She's in a state of sleep paralysis. And she said, but she managed to turn her head and noticed that the door was open to her bedroom, and that terrified her because she felt she was trapped in her body and the door was open. And then she said, as I was looking at the door, she saw 3 spindly fingers come round the edge of the door and this being poke its head round. And her literal description was, she said, it had huge black insect-like eyes, 2 holes for a nose and a slit for a mouth. And it looked at me and it blinked and it dodged back as if it was shocked that I'd seen it. It clearly was embarrassed. It hid from me. And she said, and then I found myself dozing off to sleep again. And she said, for God's sake, Tony, what did I see? And I tried to calm her down. But she'd seen the classic grey in exactly the same as Ali's description of her childhood thing. Now, clearly, this is an archetype that takes place. But then things started to develop. So she sees the UFO. Then she sees the entity. And then a few days later, I'm going round to her house and she's talking to me quite generally. And then she goes, the children aren't singing as much anymore. And I said, what children? And she said, the children that follow me when I'm shopping. And they come into the house sometimes. And I said, children? She said, well, they're not children, they're little people. And they talk to me, and they have this kind of trill noise that they sound as if they're talking to me. They can't communicate. And I said, right, you're letting children in the house. And she said, no, they're different to that. But she said, they're not as friendly as the old man in the kitchen. And I'm going, what old man in the kitchen? She said, there's an elderly man in the kitchen. He never speaks, but he always nods and he smiles at me. So I immediately put two and two together, and I think Charles Bonnet Syndrome. She's developing Charles Bonnet Syndrome. She's partially sighted. It's the classic. But Charles Bonnet Syndrome is also a precursor for Alzheimer's. So I immediately get her to the doctor, and I had to explain to the doctor what Charles Bonnet Syndrome was, because the doctor had no idea. And I said, no, these things, that it's known, just look it up, will you? It's Charles Bonnet Syndrome. So we eventually got a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. But I'd tell one final story, which I will be putting in my next book, because it's not in the last one, which was extraordinary. I'm sitting here in this house about a year, 2 years before she died. Okay. And she died of Alzheimer's, went into, she just disappeared. We lost her for a couple of years. But it was the last time she was properly compos mentis. She hadn't been for ages, but suddenly she became compos mentis. And what happens is the home she was in phones me up, and they say, Tony, can you please calm your mother down? She's in a state of hysteria. You need to speak to her. She's saying, I need to speak to my son. I need to speak to my son. So they put the phone over to her, and she picks up the phone. She goes, oh, Tony, thank God it's you. And I said, what's the matter, Mum? She said, these people have captured me. She said, I don't know what I'm doing here. It's like I've been abducted. I don't know who these people are. I don't know where I am. And suddenly I was having a rational conversation, or semi-rational, with somebody that hadn't spoken properly for months.
Wow.
And she turns around and she goes, and she said, all that happened was I was sitting watching, and this is what is scary. She said, I was sitting watching Morecambe and Wise with your father on telly.
Wow.
And suddenly I just closed my eyes for 40 winks, and I'm here, and I don't want to be here. And I said, well, Mum, you're 92 years of age. You're in a home. No, I'm not. I'm 42. And I said, Mum, look at your hands. And she said, I don't need to look at my hands to know how old I am. When your father finds out about this, we're going to be suing these people for abduction. And then she goes, oh my gosh, hold on a minute. She said, who are you? And I said, I'm your son. She said, no, you're not. No, you're not. You sound much older than my son. My son's at university. He's in his early 20s. And I thought, no, Mum, no, really, you're not. And she then slams the phone down. She slams the phone down, won't speak to me. And then I'm meant to speak, and they calm her down and they sedate her. That's called a Peake experience. It's the experience where she literally, the way I talk about the linga surya, the long body? Yeah. What happened was the Alzheimer's had flicked her right back into another part of her simulated life. It had flicked her right back to the age of 42 or 43. Now, can you imagine how terrifying this must be?
Yeah.
You think you're watching Morecambe and Wise on television, and suddenly you're not. Suddenly you're an old person. Yeah. Now, again, this has been reported many times. Oliver Sacks, in his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, has a section called A Return to India. And in it, it's a young 19 or 20-year-old girl who's dying of an astrocyte growth in her brain. And he describes in this young woman, as she was dying, was going back to her childhood in India. And she was more and more spending time in her childhood. And this is because as you get towards your death, the memories that you're going to experience in the panoramic life review when you die, according to Cheating the Ferryman, these start to stimulate. They start to erupt from somewhere. Yeah. Wow. And suddenly you're having these memories. And again, this massively reinforces my hypothesis. This is the thing that drives me crazy. My hypothesis actually works. It explains things, but that is uncanny. So sorry about the little going off on a tangent there, but it was important to get those ideas across.
Yeah, and I think as well, there's that old Christian saying, nobody's as close to God as very old ladies and very young children. It's that sort of, they have access to information that nobody else has, is almost touching on what you're going to be looking at with the neurons in the brain. But, my brain just went. It's so fascinating. The same thing happened with my nana.
But it's also,
go on.
Go on, Laura.
It's also like what we were talking about, Ali, with Anthony's books. It's like this information. This is what we were talking about last night, Anthony. The information in your books had to come into fruition somehow. Okay, and I always call you the catalyst that has brought all of us together in our Wheel Within Wheels. But Ali and I both agree that the information that you have written in these books, somebody had to be knowledgeable enough and a good enough writer to be able to write this to get people's attention. Okay. And that's why you are the catalyst, was because of what you've written. That information was supposed to get to certain people, which I feel like I'm one of them. Ali feels like she's one of them. And I don't think it was meant for everybody. And I think that you, even though I know you're so humble, but I've told you for, 6 years that you changed my life. I know I say that, or your books, but whatever it was that needed this information to be conveyed needed someone who would be able to do it. And that's what you've been able to do. And just like Ali and I've talked about, your books only come to us when we need them. I haven't read them in order either, because I only needed certain ones at certain times. And then when you reread them, stuff starts to make sense that you didn't even catch the first time, because it wasn't relevant to you. And over the 7 years, every time I read Labyrinth of Time, some new information comes to me from that book that I didn't even understand before, because I hadn't lived these 7 years. Dan, Ali, you agree with me?
Oh my God, yeah, totally. Because we were even saying, because I believe there's a power in the energy of books. So I'll even use books as good luck tokens or open a random page, which I think is always really important in books that you've been interested in. But I think Laura and I were saying, without trying to sound too trite, is that we both met the love of our lives after reading these books. I picked up that Damon book from the charity shop, and it saved me time, because I thought I was going to write a book. I don't mean in an egotistical way either. I was just so frustrated nobody got this higher self theory I'd got going on. But then that freed me up to go, you know what, I'm going to go back to teaching. And I got my teaching, and now I'm the head of a department, and money's flowing in better, and I'm happier than I've ever been. I'm intellectually stimulated. But every time I meet a person that knows Anthony's books, I mean, you, Laura, you and I had that. They have like the Japanese term, the premonition of the love of your life coming in. I have it with friends through Anthony Peake books, whether it's a teacher at college that I've lent a book to, and then he's going, oh my God, this all makes sense. And it's like, we already knew all this stuff, because that's what Gnosis is, isn't it? The future me already knew that I was going to pick up this book, be friends with Laura. We have no connection on the earth until Anthony, and then we've found out we've got all these wheel within wheel connections. But without making you sound like some kind of guru, because I'm not putting that on you, Anthony, my actual life got better. Things flowed better. I had more motivation.
Me too.
Yeah, it's very weird. And I didn't equate it all at the beginning. And each book I pick up, I just think, oh, wow, this is like the next stage of information that my Damon needed to help me move on.
And I find there. Yeah, and I find that people that I don't even know, and I was telling Anthony this, I think, yesterday, people that, even young people that have read books, I will get messages from people I have no idea who they are, but they know I've met Anthony, because I've put the picture up before when I went to Milan, so a lot of people know that I've met him. And I get messages from people all over the world, young and different, male, female, going, what am I in now? How did I get in this? What is this all about? What do I need to know? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. I go, all I can tell you is what I've experienced. And what I've experienced was everything became positive. I felt like I know more than I've ever known. I have information that I never would have had 7 years ago, and I don't know where it's coming from. I know that it's coming through to me through Anthony's book, so I know he's a part of it. But I mean, I had a young guy named Keith who he messaged me every day. He's married with 2 young kids, going, okay, you've got to write it out for me. Tell me what I need to know. When do I need to read what? And what do I need to take from that? And he had no idea how he knew he had changed. He just knew it had something to do with reading your books. And that, I mean, everybody says the same thing. And I know, Anthony, that you've had a lot of guests on who come up to you and just say, wow, that story of the woman on the train or bus or whatever that looked down and just found your book. Everybody has a story like that, just like Allie's story and just like my story with the little dog. And everyone you talk to is like, I don't know how I came across your work, but I knew that I was supposed to happen.
Well, as we did, when we used to meet, when we met that time in the Bridge Inn in Port Sunlight, that group that we met there, and one of the ladies that was in that group contacted me recently via Mike, Detective Mike.
Right.
And she contacted me because one of her associates was having problems with somebody having dissociative personality syndrome. And I managed to point this lady in the direction of Dr. Terence Palmer, who is next month's guest, or is our next guest on here, I think. And he deals with various things. And it does seem that we're all being joined together by this. And I don't know if you've seen that very short excerpt.
Yeah.
I did a talk in Edinburgh about 8 or 9 years ago. And right at the end of the talk, I make this incredibly strange statement, because as you know, when I lecture, I don't do notes. I just lecture off the top of my head anyway, and I don't need notes. I go where my daemon takes me. And at the end of it, I turn around and I say, maybe I'm here in order to help you discover who you are, because I'm part of you. And then I sort of take a double time, and I think you can see my brain going, wow, of course, because I'm part of your Phaneron. I'm part of your world, in the sense that I'm, it's all very weird. As you say, it's wheels within wheels, Well,
sorry, remember, there's a part in one of your books where you say, maybe I'm talking to you and you're, what is it? It's something that's really, you say in the book, I'm talking to you and maybe you're getting this information because you're supposed to hear this from me or something. It's in one of your books.
Yeah, it's the idea where I turn around and say, what made you pick up this book? What series of circumstances made you choose this book from all the books you pick up? And then I turn around and I say, but then again, think about this. What is happening here is something is reading symbols on a page, and those symbols are evoking images in your mind. Yep, but this is you creating the images. Effectively, you're collapsing the wave function of your reality, and I'm part of that wave function. But if we ultimately, if we are one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively, we are literally all here to help each other. I believe I get as much feedback from people like you guys, from Sarah, from everybody else. I gain as much because it spins ideas out in my mind. And, we're building this idea of what we call the egregorial. The idea that when we all get together, when we do this now, we are creating an egregore. We're creating a thought form that's greater than the rest of us. And when Sarah and I have met with our little group in Croydon, and we all get together, there is some kind of magical power that just comes together. I totally
agree.
So do you think that comes from a non-local situation and all the energy that we put into the concentration and the passion? Because you have passion writing the book, get carried away writing it, and it just comes to you. I get passion reading the book and receiving that energy that you experienced, and that exists forever. So we're meeting on this forum now, all in separate rooms. So I believe it's our energy is so intense, like you say, could produce an egregorial, can't say it, thought form. And also everybody who's watching then adds to it. At the same time as we can pick up this book in 1,000 years, we'll have the energy of every single person who's read every single copy of this book. That is one mind consciousness, isn't it? And I often wonder, why you are not read by millions, why you're not a literary superstar, but you're not supposed to be right now, because at the moment, it's quite a precious thought form in my mind, and it could easily be broken or sold out on, or something in it. It has to grow in the way that nobody's going to see your book right now on a TV advert. How people come across your book's unusual and what they take from it. But when it grips you, you suddenly become part of this global group of friends.
It's interesting.
I totally
yes. It's interesting you say that, because Professor Richard Grosinger, who's been a previous guest on the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour, he didn't know about my work, and he came across it, and he decided that he would listen to the audible version of Is There Life After Death? And he messaged me a couple of weeks ago and he said, I've never done this before. He said, over a period of weeks, I've been listening to your Audible version. And he said, I genuinely believe that I get more out of listening to you describing your writing and reading it than any other author I've ever come across. And he said, there's something about the way your intonation and the way you say things. But he then said, I then finished it and I started it again. I decided I would go and start it again. And he said, I just don't do that. And I just wanted to listen again. And he said, listening again, there's more nuances. There's more bits of information that I'd not seen before. Now, I have to be honest here. I read my own books and I go, when did you write that? Where did that come from? Where did that turn of phrase come from? And I sometimes think I write in almost a semi-fugue state, because at the moment I'm having, it's been quite difficult writing the new book. It is. It's not flowing in the way. But I know from all of my previous books, there's a point where it just goes ding. And it just happens. It just comes out of me like this incredible flow of information. And it all comes together in the most extraordinary way. And I think you're quite right. I really expected by now, with 11 books out there, that people would have been picking my books up and saying, this guy really is joining the dots. And sometimes, and friends of mine know this, I get frustrated sometimes and I get petty and I get saddened and irritated when I read about other writers who are writing something that's about a tenth of what I write. And they're becoming sensational. People are going, oh, this is the most genius stuff ever. But I realize that that's not what it's about.
Nope.
I'm not doing this for this. I'm not doing this for fame. I'm doing this because of the wonderful people I meet and the feedback I get and the way in which, I don't know, it's just wonderful. It's just absolutely wonderful. Well, and I think that if it ever got bigger, it wouldn't work. It's got to get bigger after I'm dead. I don't think and Anthony, I don't think that this information was meant for everybody. That's where, and that's where maybe that does sound, I don't want to use the word conceited or whatever, but I feel like only certain people were chosen to get this. Okay. And I don't, it wasn't meant for everybody. It wouldn't work that way. That's not how it wouldn't be wheels within wheels. That's what it was meant to be. That's why we feel such a closeness, because that's what it was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It was supposed to be close knit. If it was everybody, it wouldn't matter. It suddenly wouldn't matter anymore, And so it's the fact that we are that it is special, and that's what I wake up every day loving, the fact that 7 years ago I feel like proud or special in the way that something somewhere for some reason chose me to be a part of this, and I do. I mean, it could almost make me cry because I feel so special. I mean that. And I think everyone does. Don't you think as well that it's very important that we do our own thing with Anthony's work? So for me, being an English teacher, I can weave extracts into lessons. I can have philosophical discussions as a personal tutor with young people that are aged 16 to 20. And I think what I may take from Anthony's book is what I'm supposed to give out to those 5 or 10 people. And that just because it might only be 200 a year, whatever the numbers are, it doesn't matter. Something like a thought form that is created has to be treated like a precious child and have time to grow and have time to other people to put input in. It's so precious. A mother wouldn't put her child on the stage at the age of 4 and go, here it is, keep it. Does anybody else agree with me when we're talking back to the thought form? I totally agree. You don't want it all out there. You don't want to share, you don't want to share everything with everybody, because a lot of people are not going to be able to be a part of this. I think it is a certain type of person that reads Anthony's books that we probably all have a lot more in common with each other than if you just went out on the street and stopped somewhere. I feel like there's a common, vertebra. That's a really interesting point. The amount of people who read my books and really don't get it. It's quite extraordinary. And there's been times when people have been parts of my group and they've read my books and they'll come to one of my lectures, particularly in the early days, and they'd come along to the lecture and they'd hear me speak. And then they'd go, do you know what? I didn't realize that was what you were saying. And you can see the light go on. You see the light go on and they go, oh my God. It's the oh my God moment that a lot of people have when they suddenly go, oh shoot, I didn't realize that. Oh my God. This explains everything, doesn't it? Right?
That's the Peake Experience right there.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
It makes me think a lot about divine inspiration. I think about this idea of divine inspiration, and, you know, like you were saying, you often don't feel like you're consciously aware of what you're writing, or when you're in the flow, it just kind of comes through you like you're channeling some information. And I think that it's one of those things that, you know, when you like listen to someone singing and it's really beautiful and you get that wonderful sensation in your body of like just absolute bliss, is because in that moment they've hit that divine inspiration sweet spot, and because it's so true and pure and honest, it communicates directly to the cells in your body and produces this effect. And I think we're kind of often getting away from that a little bit in our culture, because that idea of divine inspiration has become a little bit watered down, and art's become more conceptual, more clever and more intellectual. And so, you know, when I think about ancient art, and I really love naive art and outsider art, and with those people, they are completely just flowing with this artistic inspiration that comes from outside of them, that they cannot do anything other than create this art. And there's something about it, even if it's kind of harrowing, that is so engaging and enduring, because it's so pure and it comes from such a raw source place that you can't miss it.
It's very much, and I think I'm really pleased, you know, that we're referencing here Abraham Maslow and the Peake Experience and the idea of self-actualization. And it's those moments in life where it clicks, where you just sense, as we've said, you sense the numinous, you sense sometimes things that you can't say words for, and I feel sometimes when I'm writing, and sometimes the ideas that come out, I feel they're much bigger than me. And I sometimes think, oh my God, it almost gets overpowering sometimes. I have to say, sometimes I think, oh my God, how can I deal with this? But one person I'd like to reference here is somebody that was right at the very start of everything, who had a very similar experience to Laura. It's a lady called Susan-Marie Kovalinsky. And Susan-Marie contacted me from New York around about a year after the first book came out. And Susan had lost her husband tragically at a very young age, just before she picked up Is There Life After Death? And Susan was so stunned by the book that she financed an event in New York for me. She paid for me and Martin Huxter, a previous guest on this show, to fly over to New York at her expense, and she hired the ballroom at the Roosevelt Hotel in Madison Avenue. She paid for food for 300 people. And she didn't want any of the money back. She just did that. And she said, I needed to do it because I want your work out there. It is so profoundly important. And it was at that point, 300 people turning up, and you genuinely believe that this is the break-even point. This is where it's going to come out. But it never really did. And it's again fascinating, because at that meeting of those 300 people, I met about 7 or 8 people that joined me afterwards for a drink. People like Tracy Titus. Hi, Tracy, if you're listening or if you watch it afterwards, whose birthday it was. And she decided that she'd come to my talk, and she was supposed to be going off and see friends. And she decided she wasn't going to do that. She was going to stay and talk with us in the bar. And then she said, oh, I must go because my friends are talking to me. That was, 15 years ago? Tracy is still a friend of mine on Facebook. Susan-Marie is still a friend of mine on Facebook. And it's because we're all being drawn together. And it's because there's something special about all this. And yes. I am so humbled by it sometimes. And it sounds like crass, but people who know me genuinely know that that's not what I'm about. I'm about wanting to understand, you know?
Yeah, it's like Sarah was just saying, divine inspiration. We know it in a piece of music. You can play classical music to a baby, and there's something in that baby's emotions that it can tune into the emotions of the opera or the music as it's been sang. And the same with artworks. I think about Picasso and finding fame after death, and we're tuning into the art and his turmoil at the time. I really need the world to know it's exactly the same with books and book energy. So if you get hold of Homer's Iliad, or you're reading something from Chaucer, for me, it's always come quite naturally. I've got a history degree. I consider myself a historian above an English teacher, is that you can walk into an old place or pick up an old book, the energy is there, and everybody who touches it or reads it adds to it. So I don't ever want to call you a conduit or a channel. I like Laura's word. You're a catalyst, and all this information floods through. But when I watch your talks, and I've never met you in person, I know you're in this same sort of flow that I get into when I'm lecturing. And we can be doing a 3-hour lecture, and it's all in my head. I don't know what's going to come out. I don't refer to notes, and we have a great old time. And 100% without fail, it works. And what it reminded me of when you said that, and I've seen you in that flow, is Billy Connolly's wife said the same thing about him. So Pamela, as we know, she's a psychotherapist now, and she said he just gets up there and does it, and never once did his brain, or as she called it, failed him with this divine flow of energy that comes through. And I just think in books, it's immortalized, isn't it? In a way that I think there's a whole study there itself to do with consciousness and the energy in books, that we get it in films and music and art.
It is so to do with the recipient though as well, like the reader.
Right,
Like that feeling when you've got a fantastic novel that you've loved so much and you lend it to someone and they're like, not bothered, don't even bother reading it most of the time.
Yes.
But to you, it's been like, I've lived this life, with certain books I've read, I think Lolita is probably the favourite book I've ever read.
Yeah, Lolita, light of my life, light of my loins, Lolita, do it on 3 steps on the back of the tongue. Lolita, wonderful, isn't it?
It's just poetry. I feel like, Rebecca Sharrock was reading Lolita. I've probably read it about 200 times, more than that. I probably can't recall all of it, but that the whole, Lolita for me, when I read it, it's like I'm there, I'm living it. And I remember reading this thing about novels and how they said that basically because you're living it in your imagination, you create neural pathways that would be associated with doing it if you had been doing it in your real life. So in a way, you've kind of created a dimension of that reality in your head. I think novel reading is amazing. And with regards to writing and the divine inspiration that flows through you, I think with novels and with poetry, you often get those feeling responses to information. I was talking to someone earlier today. I did an interview about sort of my dream research, and I said to him that I think that with stories and narrative, you can encode information, but because it extracts a feeling response from your reader, that information is more deeply integrated into your subconscious and conscious memory. And I think that's probably what was occurring in the mystery initiation rituals in places like ancient Greece and ancient Egypt. And I think, you're talking about not that many people are going to be able to get your books, but I think that's probably always going to be the case. There's going to be, how many people were initiated in the ancient world? Maybe it's just the initiates, and maybe that's what makes it special.
But Sarah, what we can do is recreate it all, can't we? If the opportunity arises, we're going to do it. I think that it's a process, though, isn't it? I mean, I remember reading something like, I love Rudolf Steiner, and reading his book Knowledge of the Higher Worlds, and I remember it sitting on my shelf for about 4 years before I bothered to pick it up. And then I think that if I'd read it at any time before that, I would have been like, what a load of gobbledygook. And when I opened it 4 years later, suddenly it started to make sense, and suddenly the stuff that it explains in the book started happening to me. So I think there's a relationship and there's a feedback system between like reader and writer, where there has to be that kind of consensual experience there. Yeah, it's almost a collaboration, isn't it, between the two? And this brings us perfectly round to one of the first reasons that Laura and I were wanting to do this particular interview, is the novel The Magus by John Fowles, and how, for me, that is the novel of my life. And every 5 or 6 years I reread it again, and I'm a different.
At least it's not The Collector. That would be a terrible novel to be the novel of your life. The Collector.
Absolutely. Or The French Lieutenant's Woman. I'm the French Lieutenant's whore. But The Magus for me, it's Greece. It's everything. And I'm so much Nicky Earth. When I was in my 20s, that guy was me. Yep. Laura, I don't know what you do have to say about that, but. Have we?
Yeah. Well, the thing is that I always call you Nicholas now, don't I? Just
you do.
Laugh.
You do.
But,
yeah.
But it's a really, 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 really complicated book. Okay, it's a really, really, really complicated book. As a matter of fact, it's the most mind-blowing book I've ever read because of most of it I don't get. Okay. I had to watch the movie when we were going to do the interview. I actually downloaded the movie with Michael Caine. I thought it's going to be a lot more clear to me what's really going on if I watch it on film. It wasn't. It's sort of how life is. It's so complicated. And with Nicholas, he was you, but then of course you've got the other characters, and it's just one of those stories that every chapter you read, you're going, what does that mean as far as life goes? And that's what Nicholas was going through, and they were actually putting him through that, and then in the end, it actually turns out that the whole thing was planned for him, so maybe that's how life is. Maybe our lives, which are so complicated and we have so many answers, is really, as we talked about before, possibly a game. I always our mutual friend Jim Elvidge that wrote Universe Solved, a simulation in the sense that, like you liken it to Lara Croft games, where you go at a certain point, but then you don't go down that door, that you went down last time. You can rewind and go down another way, and that's sort of what that book reminds me of, because that's what happens to him. You know what I mean? Is that making sense?
Yeah, and the idea of the way in which the June and Julia, and the way in which the women kind of morph into different personalities, and you initially think it's ghosts,
right?
But you then still have the magical within Brunei and the place, because you still have the Satan, you have the incidents where they might be actors or they may not be actors. And it really plays with your mind. And I remember quite distinctly, a great book is a book that you remember where you were when you read a certain incident. And I remember reading about Ali's suicide. And I remember even now, straight back, I was on the top deck in the front seat of a number 77 bus at Rains Park in South London. It's that precise. And I remember thinking, she's killed herself. And it's just extraordinary how he can do that. Right. But of course, as a postmodernist novelist, the way he plays around, the way John Fowles plays around with you, again, the way he plays around with you in The French Lieutenant's Woman, where he turns around and you get, I think it's chapter 8, and you have the French Lieutenant's Woman looking out over Lyme Regis, and then he starts the next chapter and he turns around and he says, right, what does she now do? Does she commit suicide? Does she do all these things? Then he turns around and he says, well, who am I? I'm the author. But for all these chapters, you've been following and listening to everything I've told you, but you've never thought, who am I? I'm the witness to all this. And it plays with your mind, doesn't it? And it's great writing when it does things like that. And clearly in the Magus, that's what he was doing. Now, what I'm hoping is that there's mutual friends again of Sarah and I, Jason and Eileen, Jason Feite, who run a film company. And we've been suggesting to them, you really need to think about doing a film version of the Magus, maybe on set, maybe go to Spetses and do it there, because I've only tried to watch the movie version once and I thought it was bad. But I can't say, I saw it years ago, and because I love the book so much, I have certain imagery in my mind. Ali,
and was there two movies? I saw the one with Michael.
There may have been. I know of one, I think, but there might have been two. I don't know if anybody knows whether there were two or not. Ali, have you read it?
No, I haven't, but I was thinking back to my excitement when you guys were talking about Alice in Wonderland. I was obsessed with that book. My name is Alison. They used to call me Alison Wonderland in primary school. And the same as Sarah Jane's, it was the first book I ever read about that change in consciousness. And I'm fascinated now to know Sarah's into dream work, because that's my life's obsession as well. The bending, well, we could go on about dreams for the next 10 hours. So no, I haven't read the Magus or Magus, but I have had that obsession with Alice in Wonderland where that was me.
Let's theme on to Alice in Wonderland, because
for me, please, yes.
There's so many elements of Alice in Wonderland.
I think your earliest sort of literary experiences and imaginative experiences do really kind of forge your personality. And like you say, Ali, I saw myself as Alice, because to me, Alice in Wonderland describes the journey of falling into a dream.
Yes.
And, you know, that falling down the rabbit hole is
Yes.
the hypnagogia down the tunnel. And if you stay conscious and you observe the stuff as it floats past you, you end up, and then you're in the dream world proper, and you're still conscious of who you are. Because I mean, that's what happens throughout the whole of Alice in Wonderland. She's always reminding herself of who she is and where she is and why she's there.
Yeah.
And I loved that. And then, you know, I'm into like Jodorowsky, and I'm into those kind of dreamy type film directors. And I think that Alice,
like What Dreams May Come, the Robin Williams film, really struck me.
For me, the Alice in Wonderland brought home to me, there was in about 1960, 64, 65, there was a TV version made by, his name escapes me, Cambridge graduate, it'll come to me. But if you ever get the chance, watch it, because it is the most disturbing.
Well, the Sven Yankenmeyer one.
No, I've never seen that. I've been suggested to see. No, this is much earlier. This is in black and white, and it's the actress that plays Alice. You hear her in a dialogue all the time. There's a band I used to love called Trees, and they had an album called The Garden of Jane Trelawney, I think it was. But on the album cover, there's a little girl in a kind of Victorian dress in front of a house, and she's got a flow of water, and the camera has just caught that. And it has that kind of dream element. It's almost like the early Genesis covers. You know, there's this kind of magical feel that I've just watch that. It'll disturb the hell out of you. I mean, it is just curious beyond words. And the young actress that played Alice, it's the only thing she ever did. What the hell was his name? I really loved his work. He did a lot of directing. He was one of the guys that set up the National Theatre and everything.
Do you know what's weird? I've got to jump in, because over Christmas, my last trip to a charity shop, I managed to find this, the two Alice in Wonderland books by Lewis Carroll, first edition, sat right next to me, because I know, how weird is this? I didn't know you guys were doing anything to do with Alice in Wonderland. Never heard you talking about it. But I know my 8-year-old granddaughter, I will need to put it in the post to her, because she's the only other person in my life who, the older the book, the older the version, the more the kind of magic energy comes through. It's a little Dean and Son. How weird is that?
Wow.
I've just had to reach, because it was literally on the shelf to the left of me, and there's only 4 books here in the room with me.
Very quickly, I've just remembered it's Jonathan Miller.
Yeah. But I was just going to say, how strange is that? Because I only pulled that book out and got it about 2 weeks ago in a charity shop, 50p.
But what is strange, isn't it, Sarah?
That's the standard price.
But what is even odder, it was literally 1 year ago yesterday, or the day before, that we had that meeting at the atrium.
I saw that in our Facebook memories.
Yeah, and you think how extraordinary that is. We're talking about Alice in Wonderland, and you guys don't know about this. And then there's the link to Laura and her mother-in-law, and you go, wow, you know, and all we need, you know, sort of.
You know what? I think Facebook memory has this amazing effect, actually, because you often find yourself in the same sort of like, I don't know. I often, like, one day I remember looking, and I was in the British Museum, and I saw my memories pop up, and it was like, I was in British Museum this day last year. And I kind of think there's something about you hold on to a resonance of the feeling, like, you know, when Rebecca Sharrock was talking about the way that she remembers using the calendar system, if you see your life in that kind of cyclical calendar system, then you would be consciously aware of that. And Rebecca would definitely be consciously aware of the fact of what day she was in the British Museum, you know. So it's a particular way, a sort of memory palace vision of your entire life that her memory allows her to access.
And if we've lived this life many, many times before, we've been through a lot of these things before, and we've followed them through before, and we have this kind of subliminal memory. And, you know, the idea that if you've lived this life before and the daemon knows that something's about to occur in your life, you'll almost get leakage from demonic consciousness to remind you, to say there's something that's going to happen now. And then suddenly it happens, and you put it down as a precognition or as a deja vu sensation. But it's more subtle than that. It's an anticipation of something. It's like when you meet people and you know them. The amount of times, particularly since I've written the books, that I meet people and I know them, and I know they're going to be involved in this. You just sense it. And It's strange, isn't it? You know, because Sarah, when we met that time when we did the caves, you know, it was, and that was an extraordinary event. And guys, Laura and Ali, you know, it was strange and it was cold and it was weird, but it was a building together of another group, you know, that have stayed together and have realized there's reasons why. And there is the reasons. It's looking for the reasons why these people come into your lives. What are they going to do?
I think that people attract one another because of the kind of, I don't know, depending on yourself, you kind of observe whatever reality you want to observe. And then you do find it's like being on someone's wavelength, you know, that you tend to come into one another's lives because you kind of think about the same sort of stuff. Like I like the way Rudolf Steiner describes this idea of increasing your vibration. So the higher the vibration becomes of your spirit, you start to almost see like layers upon layers of reality until you're observing the spirit realms or the etheric realms. And that's quite a nice description even of what it feels like, you know, because you see people on Facebook often like moaning about stuff, or they get involved in things that make them angry, and they're really into politics, and they look out into the world and all they see is like terrible, awful things happening all the time. And you can see that world if you want, and that world certainly does exist, but it exists more for some people than it will exist for others. You know how some people always say, oh, I always have bad luck, the worst possible scenario is always the thing that happens to me. And then you get other people that like, I'm so lucky, everything like always goes my way. And then they're following their bliss. They're more in a kind of higher state of just going with the flow. And when you do that, rather than expecting tons of obstacles, you do find, you know, for whatever reason, life does tend to go a bit better.
There's a nicer side to that, because a few years ago, well, about 10 years ago, I was invited to speak at Crepe-Barrand in Switzerland. The Scientific and Medical Network over there invited me to speak. And I was being driven back by one of the guys in the group, Mike. And we were talking about this very thing about being in the zone and when everything seems to just work. And he gave me a fascinating example of this. And he said that a few years before, he'd had a really good run of luck and everything had worked out for him. And he then suddenly realized that he'd never seen a red traffic light. And he said, I was in the car and I thought, I haven't seen a red traffic light for months. And the very next set of traffic lights were red. But he said to him, that shows how when you're in the zone, if it is true that your external world, there's a kind of a feedback mechanism going on, that this will happen. You know, when we're in the zone, it just works, doesn't it? Everything you touch just works. And you just...
Anthony, how about, it was about a month ago, that, and this is going back to what Sarah was talking about Facebook, how things come to you and you sort of, Ali read your book, Philip K. Dick. She went and got it and she read it. Okay. Then you decided to post a picture of it on your Instagram. And about an hour later, I got a Facebook memory that's of me holding that book saying, look what I just got in the mail today. And do you remember I sent you that sync? It was like, It was just, and I mean, it just went from one step. It was like, Ali got it. She posted it. She was reading it. You put that on Instagram. And then I got a message from Philip K. Dick. I mean, literally, I will never, that happened. And that was like all in just like a short amount of time. It was just like all this information was just, we were in the flow. And I messaged you and I said, I think Philip K. Dick is trying to get our attention. You remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that was real.
And it is strange, isn't it, that when these things happen, you know, it's sometimes, I find with synchronicities that sometimes you look for the joke. You just wait for the pun. You wait for the cleverness about it. And the amount of times, and again, I've stopped making notes now. I used to note them all the time. Whereas now I don't bother because, you know, it's just so part and parcel of what we do. Now, of course, there's the counter argument to say, oh, well, you know, it's just confirmation bias. It's attention bias. You're looking for it because if we are the type of personalities we seem to be, you know, we are information maniacs and we take in information from everywhere. So the more information we're processing, I suppose the more likely it is that we're going to have coincidences taking place.
Well, haven't you noticed that you probably talk to a lot of people that after they start, you know, reading your books and becoming a part of this group, for some reason, something to do with the television says things to you. I mean, have you have a thought and then suddenly it's on the TV and it's it's not a coincidence. It can't be when you take the variables of how many possible thousands of thoughts you could have, and then that thought comes on the TV, or the other way around. And people I talk to all the time are like, I was just getting ready to say that.
Okay, well, I can show you something here that I've shown only once, I think, on interviews like this. But this will blow your mind, okay? Just bear with me a second.
It's just reminded me, Laura, as well. I've got to mention to Anthony what we realised the other day with what the psychic told me in the 90s. I'll come to it if we find time.
Oh, yeah.
About Anthony.
Yeah. Don't forget that, because that is incredible.
So
I think we've done pretty well. I've been trying to remember every.
Okay, it involves this book here, Man and Time by J.B. Priestley. When I was doing research for the first book, I was quite interested in time, and particularly I was interested in Ouspensky and J W Dunne. And I came across particularly Colin Wilson had mentioned about J.B. Priestley's book, Man and Time, which he wrote in 1964. I decided I needed a copy because I couldn't find one, so I needed a copy. So I went down to Horsham Library in West Sussex, and I couldn't get hold of a book, and they didn't have a copy of the book in any of the libraries in West Sussex. Okay, so I had to put in an application for a copy from the British Library in Boston Spa, where they have all all their books are there. So I filled in the form. They send it off. Around about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call to say that the book has arrived from Boston Spa. Would you like to come up and pick it up? Come into town. At that stage, I was busy with doing other things, and I left it a few days. I think it was the following Saturday. I then go down on the following Saturday and I pick the book up. I then leave it downstairs in my study. Don't touch it for a couple of days because I had it for about 3 weeks, something like that. So it wasn't urgent. One evening, I'm on my way going to bed, and I realized I didn't have anything to read. Now, me, like a lot of us, I've got to be reading something. I mean, I'll read the back of, a cereal packet if I can't read anything. I need to be reading. So I go into the study and I pick up the book. Now, this is my own copy of that book, but this was an library version. So I start flicking through it. Now, this book has 318 pages in it. Okay, it's a big coffee table book. I start flicking through the pages, and I just flick through, and at random, I get to page 91. I'm lying in bed, and I start reading it. And this is what I read. The second form of the basic idea is the easier to understand. For if a ray of light takes time to reach our eyes, it will take longer to reach than for the farther we are away from it. So two people a large distance apart could justifiably disagree about the date of an event. This is clearly illustrated by a figure and an explanation based on it by James A. Coleman in his Relativity for the Layman. So here we have a book written in 1964 where J.B. Priestley is referencing a book that I checked was published in about 1957. Priestley decides to take this particular quote. And the quote says, "This figure shows the Earth, the star Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse on the constellation Orion the Hunter and Aldebaran in Taurus. Betelgeuse and Aldebaran are 352 light years apart respectively from the Earth. Also, Aldebaran is about 200 light years from Betelgeuse. Now, suppose there is a blowout on Orion on the night of March the 17th, 2000. I read that. Now, remember, this book was written in 1964, based upon a quote from a book from 1957, a book that I had ordered at random, that had sit in Boston Spa before it was sent down to me. It then sat in the library for a few days. I then at random go and pick it up. I then at random pick it up one evening, take it to bed. So on the night of March the 17th, 2000, I turned around to my wife and I said, "What year is it?" And she gave me the exasperated look that all the women in my life give me of, "Oh my God, what's he on now?" And she said, "It's 2000. And I said, "What month is it?" And she said, "It's March." I said, "What day is it?" And she said, "It's the 17th. I said, what time of day is it? She said, the night. And I said, okay, you're the mathematician. What's the chances of me reading at random a page from 317 pages at random?
Unbelievable.
We've Leslie muted himself in excitement. The Archons are after you, Anthony. You're muted.
I muted myself. The book muted myself.
That was a gremlin.
Oh my God.
Okay, so where had I got to?
What are the chances?
What are the chances then?
Yes.
I said to her, of me picking up that book with all the variables that had been involved on the exact date, the exact time, and the exact day and the time of day.
Wow,
that he
that's
picked.
incredible.
Now that is extraordinary, and you don't need to take my word for it, because if you want to freeze, if you have the opportunity and you're watching this, freeze that. Now that was my Daemon going, now I'm really gonna pull your plonker.
Wow, that's unbelievable. That reminds me, Ali, tell Anthony and Sarah your story about the psychic.
Anthony, what sort of hair did you have in 1997?
What kind of hair?
In fact, don't answer yet. Okay. So 1997, I was doing an access course because I'd had my daughter when I was 18. So I was doing that to get to university, and I'd gone on a hen do, which I think Laura explained in America, is it called a bachelorette? And it was in a pub in Chesterfield, and it was just a group of psychics. So the girl getting married was very into all this stuff, and being brought up a Catholic, I wasn't interested in being read or whatever else. But there was one woman who she would offer to hold a watch, or she was going to give me a read, and I thought, I'm there, half tiddly. So she first of all described both my grandmothers who had passed very succinctly, which I thought, well, that's quite clever, but lots of old ladies are quite similar to my grandmas. Then she told me two things, which are quite private, I won't say, but in years to past did come true. Then she said to me, after university, you will work with a scientist, and he's got hair like Kevin Keegan, mad curly brown hair, and you will have works published with him. I said, a scientist? She said, Jan, I thought this woman's absolutely batty. Although she did go on to predict I'd have 3 sons within 5 years, and I did sort of have 3 sons within 5 years. That started 8 years later. And I didn't still equate anything with you at all. I went all the way through university doing history, and I'm thinking, well, they're professors, but they're bachelors of arts, not bachelors of science. I'm looking out for this dark, curly hair, like a mullet style. She described this scientist you get going on about. And over the years, I forgot about it. Then a few weeks ago, you invited me to come on this talk, which would be live and then published later on YouTube or published works. And then you produced a Facebook memory of yourself. I don't know if you're on holiday in Greece. You got a moustache and you'd got the hair. And I'm like, hang on a minute. And I'm now going on this show. Because obviously for me, works published, I always thought was I'm going to write a book and this scientist is going to help me. And he's got this mad, curly, dark hair like Kevin Keegan. So what was your hair like in 97? Because that's when I had this reading.
In 97, it would have been probably the last time before I cropped my hair severely short.
And you had dark curly hair, didn't you?
I went grey quite young, but I did in the years before. Yes, I did.
And you probably think I'm bonkers.
And indeed, you'll be interested to know that when I was playing football on a serious level, I had a Kevin Keegan perm.
Right, that's what she saw, but she specifically described you as a scientist.
But I'm not that. I would never call myself that. But
you weren't a historian or a Bachelor of Art. What I'm saying is it's interesting to me because what you're writing about is spiritual things in a scientific manner, trying to bring the two worlds together, aren't we?
Yeah. No,
and I just said to Laura the other day, I'm sure that's Anthony.
But then again, you see, the thing is, you can get sort of visions of things confused in certain